All right, so thank you so much for joining us. Today we have Jean-Paul Garnier from Space Cowboy Books, David Agranoff from Amazing Stories, Sheree Renée Thomas from FNSF, and John Joseph Adams from Lightspeed. These are very impoverished introductions, so I would love to invite you all to introduce yourselves, going across the bar as I see it. So, David, did you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, one thing is that I should make clear I'm not the editor at Amazing Stories. I'm a columnist
Right, right.
at Amazing Stories, but I do work with Steve quite a bit, who currently edits the mostly website, but is working on getting it back into print soon. But my main focus is um, Philip K. Dick. I do a podcast on Philip K. Dick called Dickheads that I've done for 5 years, and I'm currently co-editing the in progress Philip K. Dick Encyclopedia and organizing this year's Philip K. Dick Festival in Orange County coming up in August. And I'm interested in all science fiction history, but my expertise is Philip K. Dick.
Awesome. Thank you, David, and welcome. John, did you want to go next?
Sure. This is just like quick bio. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
quick bio.
Yeah. So I'm John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor and publisher of Lightspeed magazine. I'm also the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. And I've edited more than 50 anthologies, which is weird to say. But in addition to that, I've done reviewing, I've done interviewing. I co-founded the Geeks Guide to the Galaxy. In the last couple of years, I've started doing a bunch of writing in role-playing games because like D&D is my favorite thing. But yeah, so that's who I am.
Nice. Thank you so much and welcome. Sheree, would you care to
Hi.
say a few words of introduction? Hi.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Happy New Year. I'm Sheree Renée Thomas. I'm an author and editor. It's a lot of sunlight behind me, so forgive that. Uh, I edit the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, and I'm an associate editor for a peer-reviewed literary journal at Illinois State Normal called Obsidian. It's 50 years old, and FNSS is in its 76th year. Very, very grateful to get it back in print. We were on hiatus. So we have two issues that I can point to you right now. This is with John Jennings cover art, by the way. It tipped into the last panel presentation, so that was really great. What else can I say? Yeah, I've done everything from editing books at Random House to working on book divisions at Essence Magazine and working at Black Enterprise Magazine. I've had my own press at one point. I review books as well. I grew up reading science fiction, so I'm not new to this. And I absolutely love anthologies and short fiction. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And Jean-Paul, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jean-Paul Garnier. I am the owner of Space Cowboy Books, which is a science fiction specialty bookstore as well as small publishing house, and the producer of Simultaneous Times Anthology Podcast, which is a monthly audio fiction podcast with stories from all around the world. I've also just launched Electronic Brain magazine, and I've edited for a lot of various science fiction magazines, Worlds of If, Galaxy, Starline, the Fanzine Ionosphere. In the past, I've edited for Aphelion and guest edited quite a few other magazines as well. I'm also an events planner for author events, and I've interviewed hundreds of authors for various venues.
Fantastic. Thank you again for joining us. And yeah, thank you to all of you for giving your time this afternoon. I will jump in with the first question. So tell us your origin story as a writer, as an editor, columnist. How did you come to be involved in Lightspeed, FNSF, Space Cowboy, Amazing Stories? And anybody who feels so compelled can jump in first, or I can pick on someone.
I'll go.
Go for
Yeah,
it.
so actually, my origin story starts with one of the other magazines. My first job was at FNSF long before Sheree was editor. But out of college, my first job was as an editorial assistant at FNSF. So I was basically the slush reader. I was there for almost 9 years.
Mm.
And at some point in the process, I started editing anthologies. And the first couple anthologies I did really well. And then so that gave me the opportunity to do Lightspeed because I had become successful as an anthologist. Sean Wallace, who was editing Prime Books,
Mm.
had pitched the idea to me of doing a magazine because he was already publishing fantasy magazine, and so he was kind of pitching me the idea of doing a science fiction magazine as a companion to fantasy magazine. And so together we cooked up Lightspeed, and so I've been editing it ever since its inception, since June 2010, and I became the publisher in January 2012, when Sean had enough of publishing magazines and sold me and fantasy, and I've been publishing it ever since. Fantasy now has been dead and been resurrected and been dead and resurrected a couple of times now. After the last time it died under my watch, we sold it to Psychopomp, Psychopomp,
Mm-hmm.
and then alas, it has died again. But if it's going to ever come back again, I mean, it would be at the place that's all about like death, right? Like, they have their Deadlands
You're
and
right.
A psychopomp
Yeah.
can clearly
Yeah.
guide it back to life, right? So
Yeah.
it's in the best place possible for that. But yeah, that's how I got started at Lightspeed anyway.
Amazing. I didn't know that Sean Wallace was involved in the founding of Lightspeed too. That's amazing to know. I feel like science fiction is a bit like dairy. Like nothing that dies in genre ever really dies. So I love that kind of resurrection story. Sheree, how about you? Do you want to tell us about how you came to FNSF and your editing origins, I guess?
Oh yeah, it's kind of wild. I'm also an anthologist too. And it's funny, and I just curated a volume of Afterlives for Psychopump. So the idea of redoing and rising up like a phoenix is very, very resonant to me right now. As we work very hard to keep FNSF alive in this challenging economic environment. But my journey
Mhm.
is pretty interesting. I mean, I did forgot. I didn't even mention that I'm a writer, so I write.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
do write.
I didn't mention
And that
that
was
either
my
myself.
original dream. So I have a lot of empathy for my writers. That's why I moved with my firstborn to New York City to become an
Oh,
editor, and
nice.
that's how I ended up working at Forbidden Planet science fiction bookstore right across from the Strand at the
No
time,
way.
and it was great, fantastic. While I was trying to wait for somebody to get run over or something in the in Del Rey or one of the imprints, right? That did science fiction. But I ended up doing women's fiction and romance, Regency novels before Bridgerton. And I also edited a lot of multicultural titles and nonfiction, a lot of creative nonfiction. So I learned
Mm.
the bones of editing formally and took courses at NYU's program, right? And I was also doing my own independent publishing. I did a literary journal called Anansi, Fiction of the African Diaspora. If you find a copy, you better keep it because it's going to be worth something. And for me, my introduction to science fiction as a genre was in anthologies. So I had all of these
Mm.
anthologies that my parents had, and
Mm.
particularly my dad and my mom. They were both big Stephen King fans as well.
Mm.
So, just you already know how that affected me. And so I got permission at some point from the librarian to read all the, adult books so I could read ahead of where I should have been reading. So I was reading Tolkien when I probably should have been reading it, and and working my way around the genre that way. Gothic was a big part of it. Voice was a big part of it. I think that affected my editing
Mm.
later. I really love character-driven stories with voices. And I've always just oh, and I think I got my first copy of FNSF from a grocery store
Mm.
in Memphis. And I made my mom get it for me because I don't know, something crazy was on the cover and I wanted it. And that's when they had the really crazy covers for the horror books. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's some wild
I don't
color.
even think
Yeah.
they would have them face out
Yeah.
these days, but yeah.
Yeah.
And that I think that was part of the journey. So when I got to New York City, I was like hitting the ground running, and I just wanted to be around anyone that was doing books, anyone that was
Hmm.
involved in publishing. If I'm sweeping the floor at the bookstore, I'm doing that. I'm hanging out with the weird folks. I just, I did what I could do, and I became an anthologist when I did Dark Matter, a Century of Speculative Fiction,
Right.
African Diaspora, and it kind of took off in a way that I didn't anticipate it. I hoped, but I wasn't sure. And I always tell my friends that if I had known the weight of what I was doing, I might not have done it because, how do you, like when you're working with things, I just said, hey, I pulled things from off my shelf. W. Du Bois, that's science fiction. Why hasn't he been discussed? All these things. And I guess I was just doing what I wanted to and what I wanted to do as a reader. And that's kind of look like what would a reader really enjoy and what would be fun and what writers I love and who's out there doing this thing that I don't even know about. And so that's kind of my journey. And on the writing side, I just kept like carving out space for myself. And I did a lot of residencies. And so I published a lot of short fiction. And that's my sweet spot, though I have done novels. Yeah.
Just real quick, I gotta say, Dark Matter, legendary anthology.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Those writers are still rolling too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seconded. David, tell us how you became involved as a columnist for Amazing Stories. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, that was a cool transition. Like Sheree, I forgot to mention that I'm a writer too. I have 13 books out, and I just turned in the sequel to my novel, The Last Night to Kill Nazis. And the next Night to Kill Nazis is going to have mummies and U-boats, so look for that. I've been writing for a long time, and I got involved with science fiction through Twilight Zone and Star Trek, but it was really seeing Richard Matheson's name on the spine of a book at a used bookstore and going, I've seen his name in both Star Trek and that's what taught me that a writer was a person. And I became obsessed with learning the history of the genre from a young age. And anytime I read a new author from even when I was a teenager, I would like become obsessive about learning about who they were and whatever. And it was much harder back then. It was like collecting. And that's how I discovered the science fiction magazines. But shoot ahead to when I was asked to do the Dickheads podcast with my friends, my initial response was, I just want to read the books and show up and talk. But my father is a political scientist and an academic, and it's in my blood. And I became the main researcher of the podcast. And I started writing so much about the history. But then I became more interested in C.L. Moore and Henry Kuttner. Yeah, and everybody. And so I'd start doing these side quests on the podcast, and then had to start my own individual podcast so I could do my Science Fiction Hall of Fame series and so on and so forth. And Steve Davidson, who's the current owner of Amazing Stories, just kept noticing that I was doing these things. And because I was writing these really long book reviews for my blog that, were just going to my blog. And then he said, you should write for Amazing Stories. You should do a regular column. And it's called 25th Century Five and Dime. And that's named after the comic book store our comic book store in my hometown in Indiana. And so it's a tribute to that. But the theme of 25th Century Five and Dime is to teach the history of the genre. And my main interface with editors and the history of editing and the backstory of Amazing Stories and all that came because of things like when I was I've started Wikipedia, and I'm the one that wrote all the encyclopedia entries for all 123 Philip K. Dick short stories.
Oh, wow.
And there's a book's worth of material there. And doing that, every single time I had to research the editor who bought each story. And then it turned into, well, now I want to know who this first woman to buy a short story from Philip K. Dick was. So now I'm going to go into the history of all that, which will all be in the Wikipedia when it comes out, in whatever many years it takes to finish it. But the process was all a part of the whole thing with Steve coming to me and formalizing like a go-to for me to have somewhere to write about the history of the genre. There's a new column today
Hey.
And I'm about 19 columns in, but if you go and look at it, a lot of times what I'm trying to do is break down the history, not just of Amazing Stories, but of genre. But I think Amazing Stories is tied to the beginning of this, and then this, of course, being the 100th anniversary, it's a big deal. And I will now shut up.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, the 100th anniversary is in April. Just a quick question. So is the Wikipedia, is that live online, or is that a work in progress sort of back end? Are you meaning, is it
It's a work in
print?
progress book. We have over
Okay.
20 researchers volunteering. I'm sorry, the Southern California sun is.
Oh, I was going to say, there's like a spirit visitation.
Sorry,
The
San
light
Diego.
has come. No, it's great.
No, Wikipedia is going to be a book, and we're using the funds to where all the funds are going to go to his centennial in Berkeley, the centennial Dick Fest in Berkeley in 2028, which will be his 100th.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's going to be insane because the short stories alone is like a book's worth of material, because every technology, everything we've got.
Yeah, I was just speaking with John Clute yesterday for another online event, and he was talking about his work with the SF Online Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, and the kind of years-long iterative process, right, of creating these sorts of databases.
If I had known what was involved, I probably wouldn't have suggested that we do it.
Right, this seems to be a common theme emerging, that you're kind of drawn to your work through the love of genre, right, through the love of reading in communities, and then all these responsibilities, the realities of it.
I do want to say I'm an SF subscriber and huge fan of everyone's work here. So just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
and just want to say all of our lifetime subscribers and our other subscribers, please mosey your way over to Asimov's. It's going to sound kind of counterintuitive, but our new publisher, Must Read Magazines and Must Read Books, have bought all of the kind of legacy print science fiction magazines, Alfred Hitchcock's, the Ellery Queen of Mystery, Analog SF, and Asimov and F&SF. So if you go to their site, because they're doing a refurbish of the F&SF site, you scroll down to where you buy, you're going to find a place that says customer portal. Go there and tell them you are a subscriber and give them your information so they can make sure that you're back in their database, in their new database, and you get your new issues too. So thank you so much for that, David. Thanks, Phoenix.
No, of course. And as you're chatting, I'll find the link and I'll drop it in the chat for everyone to support all your magazines. So thank you for that. Jean-Paul, tell us. Oh, sorry. Yes, go for it.
I don't wear glasses anymore, but I'm going to push up my fake glasses. I own every issue of F&SF, so I got to make sure I do that.
Okay, great.
That's impressive.
That's a collection. That's a collection.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And they started over at Volume 1. I got a few messages about that. And that's because it's a new publisher, and they also wanted to have more evergreen approach to it. So if it doesn't have the seasonal, that readers can, enjoy those stories a little bit longer on the shelf. So, Right.
Really good to know. Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you.
All right, Jean-Paul, tell us about your origin story and the origins of Space Cowboy Books and the amazing work you do.
It's very roundabout. I'm a lifelong science fiction reader and fan, but I was doing it in isolation. I didn't know anyone else that loved science fiction. I didn't even know about fandom for most of my life. And then I was working as a sound designer and audio engineer and doing a lot of sonification work and experimental work. And I realized pretty quickly in the process that I should have gone into neurology instead of audio. And this might seem strange, but I decided to start writing science fiction full time because it was the only field where I could break the laws of physics and get away with it. Once I started writing science fiction, I was hooked and never looked back. Not long after that, I moved to a small town in the Mojave Desert, and there was no bookstore here. And I met someone that had a retail location open, and my partner said, "Why don't you pursue that lifelong dream and open up a bookstore?" And I had enough money to gamble 3 months to see if it would work. And we were in a shed in the desert. It was so funky in the beginning. And that first year went really well. I was able to quit my day job as a construction worker and go into being a bookseller full time. And part of that dream had always been, to sell used books to make new books. And so I dreamed of publishing, but knew next to nothing about the industry or how to get it done. And I happened to meet a local book designer. And around that time, I also fell into editing accidentally because a friend of mine was had a book deal and he had a horrible experience with an editor. And he was a lifelong friend
Oh
and
no.
he really trusted me. And he said, "Would
Who was
you?"
it?
What was the book?
No, who was the editor?
Uh,
I'm just kidding.
I
You
don't
have
I
to
don't
say.
feel at liberty to say.
You don't have to say. I'm just
I don't think he's
kidding.
working as an editor anymore. Let's put it that way. But he'd done a terrible job working on this book, and so my friend asked me to jump in and work on the book with him. And when word got around, other friends started asking me to edit their novels, and once I got my skill set going, I said, it's time to start that podcast and working with authors on short fiction to do audio adaptations. And from there, it's just completely taken over my life. I'm still writing science fiction, a lot of speculative poetry, but I've also branched out into writing westerns and the occasional science fiction smut book.
I've read one of those and it's fantastic. I can certainly vouch for that.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, everyone, for that. I wanted to dig a bit deeper into your creative approaches to your work. So I'm tying it into the first issue of Amazing Stories, right, where Hugo Gernsback is very intentionally stating that this magazine is going to be an intervention in the genre. He coined the term science fiction. Are there any kinds of explicit or implicit manifestos or creative aims for you all in your work that either again you're explicit about or that sort of drives things underneath the surface, again, as much as you're comfortable sharing, and I'll open that to anyone, and this could be your editing work, your anthology work, your non-fiction research, your fiction.
Well, I would say that
no, go ahead.
I would say that for me, part of the ethos is trying to get people to understand the history of what has come first, and because I think that as a genre, we're going to continue to grow if we understand where we came from, a lot of it, and some of the work that's happening, like for example, the Martian trilogy that just came out with the John P. Moore, like that is something that I didn't know anything about. I 2 years ago or whatever when it was first announced, which came out from Amazing Select. This is a piece of genre history that we can point to and say, like, oh, look, here people were doing this thing at this time and how important it is. And I think understanding the tradition or the struggles of people in the past, because especially young people today, they have no idea what it was like to submit to magazines in the 50s and 60s. And if the stories of the writers, which we're lucky to have through a lot of the archives, like at Riverside, digging through these things is magical work. It really is, and one of the things that I've written that I haven't found a home for yet is I have an entire book written on the unfinished manuscripts of PKD, and going through all the archives where his stuff is disparately spent. And I've looked at other writers while I've been there, but when you look at, for example, at Fullerton, they have the
You're right.
Dune manuscript, and you see the red pens on it.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. There's something about connecting to that history of I'm not the biggest Dune fan, but seeing that is something that is a mission for me to get out to people that there's an Indiana Jonesing type of behavior that researchers can have that can really highlight what's happening in the genre. And it connects directly to what John and Sheree are doing with the magazines today. And so important.
I love that. I don't know if you caught one of the earlier panels today, but we actually had a video from Lisa Mix, who's the director of special collections at Fullerton, talking about the PKD papers and the Herbert archives, actually. My Dune hot take that nobody asked for, I took it upon myself to read all 6 of Frank's novels this year, and I really loved up to God Emperor of Dune. I found the final two a little bit, didn't really do it for me, but nobody asked for that opinion. But thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts from you all about your kind of personal philosophies or approaches to your work?
So when we launched Lightspeed, we didn't have a manifesto per se, but we did start with the idea that we wanted there to be at least like sort of gender parity in what we're publishing, because at the time, women were still very poorly represented in just short fiction in general. I mean, compared to the population that they represent. Initially, we were able to do this because we published half reprints and half originals, and so because we had the reprints, we could very easily find reprints if we didn't find originals, so that we could achieve this parity without having to have quotas or whatever in order to that kind of thing. And then over the years, I think just women seeing themselves represented in the magazine made them more likely to submit, which was the goal, and I think that worked. And then in 2014, we launched the Women Destroy Science Fiction project, which we did a Kickstarter
I remember those.
for. And I think this was actually inspired by maybe a review in Amazing Stories. I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't by David. But somebody had said, I think it was an Anne McCaffrey. He was reviewing an Anne McCaffrey book, or maybe a Lois McMaster Bujold book, and it had some romance plots in it, and the reviewer had said that women were destroying science fiction by putting all these female whatever the themes in their books and stories. And so this was when Twitter was still a viable platform for doing anything. And so like the science fiction community was like kind of up in arms about it, and my wife Christy Ann, she had like really like led this like rallying charge, be like, hey everybody, who's with me, let's go destroy science fiction. And then so she did that, and she was getting all this like support for that idea. And then so I said, well, maybe we should do a special issue, and you can guest edit it, and we could have all of the staff that works on it be women for that issue. And then of course all the authors would be women as well. And then so we did a Kickstarter, and it was like got really successful, and so that was really cool. And we ended up destroying fantasy and horror too. And then after that, like in the subsequent years, next year we did Queers Destroy, and then the third year we did People of Color Destroy. So I mean that was like I think something I'm really proud of that we did as a magazine. And it's funny because I don't really think of myself as a publisher per se. I think of myself as an editor first, but one of my proudest achievements as affiliated with Lightspeed was as publisher, because I didn't have anything to do with those issues. So yeah, like, not a manifesto per se, but I mean, that was my sort of philosophy from the start. And then as we progressed, I mean, tried to address other, sort of inequities and how people were represented in short fiction. And so that's been important to me for a long time. And, and continues to be. And, but, other than that, I just publish what I like.
Right. I remember those anthologies, they really were kind of a turning point. And just for me personally, I hadn't thought to try publishing short fiction professionally until about 2018, around the time of these kinds of interventions, because you have the history of science fiction, and speaking to what David was saying, when you go into these archives, and especially when you look at the pulps, you have authors that don't provide their ghostwriter pseudonyms, or kind of neutral initials, right, that you see attached to a story. So you just don't know that these kinds of possibilities are open to folks who who are queer, who are BIPOC. So that's great to hear. Sheree, Jean-Paul, did you have anything to say about your kind of philosophies to your work?
Yeah, for me, I'm a reader first. So when I'm editing FNSF, I'm thinking about is this a story that I really care about? Are these people I care about? Is the situation intriguing enough to keep me focused on it until the end of the story? So it's also like John said, it's publishing what you like, but also publishing things that you feel that your readers are going to like. And they're not always necessarily like a huge like overlap, I guess sometimes. So you have to balance that, right? Because I think I like a little darker stuff. I like really voicey things. I like beautiful prose. Phoenix is one of my authors, so as a person, I didn't want to put you out there like that, but I like storytelling that really grabs me and makes me like don't wash the dishes, don't go on the podcast, stay off the streaming, finish this story because you got to. And so I guess I didn't really have a big manifesto when I was approaching my first issues of FNSF. I got some great inventory from, of course, Charlie, right? So that was wonderful. And we had some wonderful overlap because I think he has a really fine, a great sense of storytelling, not just as an editor, but as an author as well. But I'm loving world building. I love really weird imaginations. Science fiction is harder to find than people think. I think sometimes, to find like the really good stuff, right? And I guess I'm engaged with finding people from around the world. I guess that's probably something. I want to get outside of our usual way of exploring things in America, right? If I can, because we have a lot of a very common sensibility, even if we have different ethnicities, right? We're in this kind of bubble, and even more so now. But people outside of us, they have a whole different aesthetic, a whole different way of telling stories. Their boogeyman are something else, right? And there's like a lot of different psychological layers that are they kind of push up against what we are used to reading. And so I'm looking for those stories, right? I remember a particular Greek author, and I just felt like I had been dropped into another realm. And that's what I want readers to feel like. And I also don't want them to feel a sameness when they're reading. If they're going to read linearly, I don't read anything that's an anthology linear. I go like by title or author, or this seems weird. And so I skip around. But if they're going to read it from page one to page last, I don't want them to feel like each story is the same. It's the same beat, it's the same rhythm, same aesthetic. I want them to never quite know what they're going to get in the volume, but to love everything that they read if they can. So that's my goal.
That's so cool. I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I love the Greek. I mean, I'm Greek too, so whenever I hear about a Greek authors making it, I'm like, here we go. No, that's fantastic to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Jean-Paul, did you have anything to add?
I do. When I first started, it was just I wanted to share the love of science fiction through the bookstore, meeting other fans. It was so exciting to share what I cared about, and just looking for great stories. Although my attitude has changed a little over the years. Like Sheree, I want the weird. Give me your weird, dark stuff. As a poet, I really look for work that has use of prosody. If you think of a novelist like William Burroughs, he writes like a poet, and it does something to you when that level of prosody is used in the writing. And so that's something I look for a great deal as well. With my new magazine, Electronic Brain, there is a bit of a manifesto that goes along with it. And the thinking behind it is that because we all try to sell what we do online, we're publishers and there's a business element of this. And since net neutrality ended, I think a lot of publishers and writers and small magazines have focused more on narrow niche or subgenre or subcategory in an effort to stick out. And I don't think this is ultimately a very healthy thing for creative people or for our culture. And so in Electronic Brain magazine, we're including things like musical scores, electronics projects, graphic novels, plays, pocket drama, um, all things that can fit in print. And the idea is that while we all absolutely love science fiction, I mean, I live for it. I think you all do too, knowing your work. Um, Science fiction's not my only interest. Every reader I talk to is interested in other things, and readers tend to be intelligent people with broad spectrums of what interests them and or what will interest them. And as a reader, I have a rule for myself that if I ever say I would never read that, then I have to read it. I also pick up books about things I don't think I care about because everything's interesting below the surface, no matter what field it is. And with my new magazine, I really want to embrace that, to give the
Hmm.
reader the respect that I know that they're an intelligent person, that is driven by curiosity, and that every single person in the world knows about something I don't know about. And that's a conversation that I want to have with people. Um,
Hmm.
I want to learn things every day when I pick things up. I
Hmm.
love great stories. Obviously, science fiction is paramount to me, but I want this magazine to go a little further than that and broaden the conversation.
Absolutely, I got my copy of the first issue of Electronic Brain just in the mail the other day when I popped into work, and it certainly does that. I think the way you've curated it really speaks to that. I wanted to ask you, this is a bit off script, but since we're on the subject of readership, right? Building readership, maintaining readership, finding readership in 2026, the sci-fi pulps that we love and grew up with have been around for a long time, far longer than our lifetimes even. Um, so I'm curious to ask the panel, what is that balance of the old and the new, right? Sort of keeping your kind of the legacy readerships of amazing stories of Lightspeed of FNSF, and trying to build new readers, inspire new loves of genre, right? Given that, as John mentioned, Twitter was such a huge platform, really such a huge, and the more time passes, the more I realize how big it was, right, for building careers and finding community. Um, yeah, what does that look like for you all? I can sense rambling thoughts starting to happen, but I want to hear from you all. How do you balance that kind of the old and the new, growing your readership, finding your people in the field? And anyone can jump in.
I'd be
I'll
happy
just
to
say,
start.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Do you want to go, Sheree?
No, you can go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's important. I know a lot of people go into publishing with really big dreams, and it's a very difficult business. Selling a book is selling a commitment to somebody. Here's my novel. I want 12 hours of your time. That can be a big ask. And I think it's important to remember that fans are earned, whether for your magazine or for your personal writing, that fans are earned one at a time, and they're easy to lose because of that time commitment. And I mean, let's face it, there are so many options of what you can read out there. It's amazing how many stories there are. I mean, it's truly incredible.
Was
Um,
that an Amazing Stories reference? I'm winding you up. I'm
Accidentally,
winding you
yes.
up. So
Um,
winding you up.
I find myself in a fortunate position that my vocation, book selling, puts me in touch with readers on a direct basis daily. And every conversation I have is about books or about science fiction adjacent stuff, films, video games, audio, and so forth. So that's a very fortunate position to me. The death of Twitter, I think, was a blow to our community, but obviously there's a lot of different reasons for that, and the political situation becoming progressively worse has shifted a focus towards talking about that instead of talking about the things we love, which is really tragic. We'll recover from this eventually, but I think it's important to continue those conversations about the things we love, and I think it's becoming progressively important to take what we do offline and do it in meet space. When I go to conventions or when I'm out at events and talking to people, those human connections are the most important that we can make. And story is all about human connection. If you don't want to talk to people, you might not want to read stories either. I mean, this is a business about people and getting to know each other and spending time together enriches those stories that we read and love.
Yeah, I want to shout out Sheree on this one because as far as one of the things that was really exciting to me about magazine of fantasy and science fiction in the last couple of years was seeing Norman Spinrad and John Shirley in the magazine, along with names I'd never heard of because they're new authors. And I can tell you, as someone who does the Dickheads podcast, I recently interviewed a couple of years ago Walter Nelson, the son of Ray Nelson, the science fiction writer who died, who was most famous for writing the story that became the basis of They Live. And Ray left behind a bunch of manuscripts for stories, novels that he didn't even try to sell. And when you interview a lot of these older authors, some of which, you know, were in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, they feel left behind now. And, you know, some of it is because, yeah, they are from another era and they understand this. But at the same time, keeping the older readership and trying to blend new voices and remembering the voices of our elders is a balance that is tricky for editors today. And I give all the respect in the world to the editors who try to find that balance, because I want the new voices too, trust me. But for example, that Norman Spinrad story that was in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction with the catwalk.
Oh yeah.
That was incredible. That was an incredible story, and I was glad to have it, you know. And so finding that balance, you know, is at the heart of your question, Phoenix. And I think, you know, amazing stories. I know Steve sometimes makes a decision. No one's going to buy this book, or no one's going to read this one, but it's important to me to have it in the world for anyone that can find it. I've had that discussion with Steve about certain projects, and certainly, you know, there's topics I write about that I know most people aren't going to care about, but it's important to me to do that. I don't know. But anyway, so shout out to those who do that as editors, because it's hard stuff.
If I might interject for a moment, I think what you're getting at there, and which is also super important, is intergenerational communication and conversation. And it's amazing. I mean, there are so many writers out there, and when Starship Sloan relaunched Worlds of If magazine.
Sorry about that. I got kicked off. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Zoom decided to boot me out. Sorry, I missed your answer, Jean-Paul.
That's quite all right. I'm not sure where it cut me off, but intergenerational communication is extremely important.
Right.
So, Sheree, you want to jump in there?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was going to say it's a delicate balancing act, because the thing about it, especially for my my veteran readers who have lived like almost all their lives with the magazine, many of them entered it when they were young, right? When they were teenagers. And the world is different from when they were teenagers, right? And they are different in a lot of key important ways. And so the way that we tell stories, who's telling the stories, how they're telling stories has changed. And so it is a balance of finding, like, what are some great stories from the people that were the hot things, you know, when they were coming out, when they were publishing, some of the people who were the pioneers and genres that we take for granted now, right? Not only just on the page, but on the stage and on film, right? They were the ones who, it was novel when they were doing it. How do you find the stories that they still want to tell, but stories that are going to resonate with readers today, not just their fans, but people who may become new fans, right, of their work. And I feel like I've been really fortunate to be able to do that with Norman Spinrad and with some of the other writers who have trusted me with their work to put it out there. And we've had a lot of fun with that. In the meanwhile, I'm looking for the new hot as well. I'm looking for the new great voices, the people who are, you know, making us think about our world differently, right? And challenging us in some other ways. And also people who are also giving us those what I call comfort food, the comfort food of storytelling, the things that we go back to over and over again, because we're science fiction and fantasy and horror people. We love those things, right? So I enjoy, you know, just like Jean-Paul said, it is definitely intergenerational, but there's a sweet spot because a lot of the subscribers obviously are, you know, from the other generations, you know, so it's like finding new ways to reel in these other readers, and also to find readers who are not just writers, right? Because writers, you know, read sometimes because they want to be in the publication, right? Or, you know, or their friends are in the publication or what have you. But finding the readers who don't have any investment in the trade itself in terms of the business side of it, but who are just reading just for the sense of wonder. Not that the writers aren't reading for that reason too, but also like those who just like pulling it off a shelf or waiting for it to come into the mail. It's been really challenging to keep everything going when we're not publishing consistently. That's been a big, big thing. And so my hope is with our new publisher, as they get their sea legs together, that we are absolutely going to be able to say, you know, these are when these issues are coming out, you know. So right now we have volume 2, it's in production, they'll be coming out. And then, you know, I already have like a ton of writers that I've been waiting to publish for, it feels like a 1,000 years. It feels like a mother who's been pregnant forever in 10 days, right? And it's like, it's because I've lived with the stories. I remember reading them for the first time, either they sent them to me or they went into the portal, that they're alive in my body in a way. And I need to, you know, get them out so that they're alive in the other bodies too, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
and I'm looking, and also I'm just happy because our publisher has agreed to honor all of the stories that we'd already accepted. So it's just a matter of, you know, I had to realign some of the issues, because we went from 6 issues a year down to 4, and then during the transition, when they were negotiating to buy the magazines, you know, we could even do the 4. So now we're back on it, and
that's fantastic.
so I'm looking forward to getting those stories out there and seeing what's happening now. What are people writing about right now? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you.
I didn't say anything on this topic, but why don't we just jump to the questions since we're
sure. Yeah. Thank you, John. Yeah, I know we've got about 11 minutes left, and we definitely have some questions from our audience. Eric says, hello, I'm a professor of philosophy here at UCI. He's published 15 stories, including in FNSF under Gordon Van Gelder. Has edited an SF anthology and currently editing another. He's curious about your thoughts about the financial situation for publishing short stories, especially the difficulty of making money with anthologies and finding publishers, and the difficulty of publishing print magazines like FNSF in comparison with online magazines. So again, as much as you're able to share, you know, you don't have to go warts and all, show your spreadsheets, but just sort of speak to either of those questions as you feel comfortable.
Well, I'll say that, you know, when I sold my first anthology, Wastelands, it came out in 2008. Yeah. You know, at the time, like, nobody was really buying anthologies very much because publishing always says, like, anthologies don't sell. That's like the institutional knowledge of publishing that everyone repeats without ever checking any actual data or anything. But when Wastelands was very successful, that started to change. I mean, I don't want to claim all the credit for it, but after Wastelands came out, it did start to change. And like I also had The Living Dead come out the same year, and then that was even more successful than Wastelands. But then the landscape seemed like it started to change, or at least it was changing for me because I had these successes. And then that lasted for a good long while. Like, there were a couple of years where I had 5 anthologies out, like, in back-to-back years. And it's like, that seems crazy in retrospect, because now publishing has gotten back around to the idea that anthologies don't sell again, like, as their main refrain. But I mean, the thing is, like, all along and even now, I mean, if you can find a topic that is, like, feels timely to publishers, something that's like a hot subgenre or whatever, and you can get enough, like, famous writers to say that they'll write stories for it, somebody probably buy it, you know. And then, you know, I don't know how well they ever sell these things, because the problem is publishers still don't believe in them, even if they buy them a lot of the times. So I'll have a test coming up, because I did sell a new anthology last year that should be out in, like, 2027. But and it was a pretty, like, big proposal and stuff. We had a lot of famous writers associated with it, so it's like, if any publisher is going to get behind a book, it should be one like this. But, you know, and then we'll see what happens. But you know, it's a dicey proposition for sure. And then for the magazines, it's like even harder. I mean, you'd think it wouldn't be as hard, because a magazine can at least have subscribers, so you have, like, a built-in regular every month people are going to buy the thing. Whereas anthologies, it's like you got to find your audience afresh each time. But yeah, I mean, it's, you know, with online magazines, there being so many different ones, and most of us offer all the stories for free. And so we're kind of relying on people to subscribe because either they want the convenience of the ebook or they want to support the magazine. Not enough people ever support the magazines, so it's a constant struggle for sure. I don't have any good answers for it. But that's my perspective, I guess.
Yeah. I'll just say this, publishing right now, especially print magazines and genre magazines, is very challenging, it's very difficult. And I don't think people don't realize it's not particularly profitable, right? So the people who are doing it, whether they're, someone that's, at their own little desk at home doing it, or someone that's working with a team of people, they're doing it for the love of it for the most part. And so there has to be a balance between, paying your writers like professional rates and making sure that they're good, but also being able to handle like the overhead of it. And print is a significant overhead with the distribution and all of that as well, right? The printing and the distribution. So right now, the FNSF and the other four amazing magazines have been acquired by a group that's really fans of the genre, right? Because who else is going to do this, right? But someone who really loves science fiction and fantasy. And so we're really grateful for that. But in terms of the like balancing, how do you get a dollar out of this, right? And then how, so that you can, pay all the things that you need to, including first the writers, right? And how do you do it in a way where the writers feel respected, they feel listened to, and they feel like you're honoring them. That's a balance that our new publisher has been working out, and thank goodness for the writing community, because they have been vocal on it. And I'm happy to say that with the guidance of SFWA, SIFWA, I've just found out very, very recently, I think last week, that they have come to an agreement on at least the boilerplate, because anybody who knows it's been published with FNSF, we give you a one-pager. That was our previous contract. It's been like that for many, many years. And so with a new publisher who has insurance and other things that most of us, when we did our anything, we didn't have insurance. We weren't worried about getting sued. We weren't worried about indemnity and all that. It's a whole different kind of thing. And I think when you're looking at the contract at first, it's kind of like, whoa, what is this? So it's just kind of making sure that it handles like the standards that writers have been fighting for a long time in our genre, because it's a little different in some other parts of the publishing world, right? It's not exactly Hollywood, even though a lot of our writers do have their work adapted into things, but it's trying to figure out, how do you stay in print, right? Writers aren't thinking about that, readers aren't thinking about that. And as John said, those subscriptions don't necessarily pay the bills. They don't. They support, but they do not cover even the people who are doing everything for free. It doesn't cover it. So there is a balance for that. In terms of the demographics, I haven't seen a change in the demographics, to be honest. Still getting requests, even though the call for submissions isn't open yet, because I don't want another queue of writers. I want the writers that we've already accepted are, in the publication schedule with their contracts and everything good, and their payments in their hands. So, but I'm still getting submissions from people who know me, and also people who I've published before. And because they have faith that we're going to make things right. And I think we have. A lot of these things are not in the hands, like I'm not the publisher. John is the publisher. Jean-Paul is the publisher. David is, David, you're not the publisher, right?
I'm not a publisher.
You're not a publisher, but you are very close to the publisher. So you know. So some things is not my call to make. I can weigh in, I can, share my opinion or what have you, but I don't make those decisions because I'm not the one writing those checks, right? So at the end of the day, my goal is to have a very writer-focused, transparent, environment where people feel really good and comfortable sending their work.
It kills me that Sheree, that there are writers that don't think about the business aspect for the publisher. Well, and I kind of religiously believe that if you're not subscribing to at least one magazine, you don't have a right to submit to anybody, because you should be part of the bookosphere. And for me, I'm going to review everything that I read, and maybe I don't get the review in return for my books, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm going to add to the bookosphere every time I can, and for that karma.
And even if you can't, because there are some people who can, and I remember a point when I couldn't subscribe and I had to pick and choose like which publications I should subscribe to, right?
Right.
Um, and was really grateful for the magazines that were free. And, I remember when Strange Horizons first went online and it was like a big deal. Oh my God, the work is online. And now, it's the thing to do. Even if you can't afford to subscribe, review stories that you love, talk it up amongst your friends, support the writers because they almost always have other projects that you can support. Be a part of the fandom in that way. That does help magazines recommend stories for awards, during the award season, all of that good stuff. Put it face out in your library or wherever it is,
I put every issue of Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, when I'm done with it, I put it in the free library in my neighborhood with a note about the importance of science fiction magazines.
Thank you.
That's hardcore, man.
Well, it's
spreading the word.
Spreading the word. Yeah.
So I'll just say, regarding like the support and everything, like, I don't know how it is for other magazines. It's probably comparable, but like if all of our like monthly unique visitors just paid us like $1 or 50 cents, like the magazine would be doing amazing. But, most people who go to read it on the website, they don't support it at all. And I mean, that's fine. We put it out there for free on purpose. That's why we do it, so that everyone can read it, because we want the readers more than we want, more than we care about the financial support, although we do want that. But it's just funny when you think about it, like when it's such a small amount that people could contribute and it would make such a humongous difference. But, you try to do things like, just put as many options as possible for people to be able to support. Like, like, oh, here's a little pop-up that says like, oh, drop something in our Ko-Fi, or you can set up a recurring PayPal donation, or you can subscribe via Patreon, or you do the Patreon thing. And there's all these ways,
right.
But still, it's just hard to get that financial support.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We are almost at time, but on that note, I just wanted to thank you all again, and just a quick fire round. Where can we find you all? What's something cool that's coming out that you want to plug? Just go down the line, because we'd love to support you in the ways you've been mentioning.
Okay. Cool. I'm Sheree Renée Thomas, editor of FNSF, and you can find me on Instagram under my name, Sheree Renée Thomas. Also on Blue Sky, but I don't do a lot over there. I got to figure out the energy of Blue Sky. It's not like the fun days of Twitter. So I got to figure it out. And if you're a fun person, follow me. If you suck, do not. I have a new short story collection called Mojo Rhythm from Third Man Books. Check it out. And so that's what's going on.
David Agranoff. I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky mostly. I have the Philip K. Dick Film Festival Festival coming up August 20th through the 23rd in Orange County. And we are going to have play readings, script table reads. It's not just academic lectures, but we have a call out for papers. So please submit. But every Tuesday night, we do a Zoom hangout with a different interview guest, science fiction related. So people can find us there. Dickheads is on YouTube at just Dickheads Podcast. And, we have like 6 years worth of science fiction content there. So, and I have a novel called Great America and Dead World. It's my most recent science fiction novel. So that.
Awesome.
I'm John Joseph Adams. I edit Lightspeed magazine. If you want to follow what I'm up to, you can subscribe to my newsletter. It's called Robot Wizard Zombie Crit. And send that out every week. Actually, Phoenix reads it a lot. He sends me messages about it. But
it's a really good newsletter. Yeah.
Yeah. And the latest thing I did was I did an Amazon Original Stories collection called The Time Traveler's Passport, which you can go read on Amazon for free if you're like a Prime or Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Otherwise, they're like $2 each or something. But that's a bunch of awesome stories. And also Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2025 came out in November, so that's like the most recent thing, guested by Nnedi Okorafor. That's volume 11. So we've been going at it a while, but yeah, that's it.
Jean-Paul Garnier. You can find everything I do at spacecowboybooks.com. Something very exciting coming out soon. I'm releasing a book in May for James Machel, who's one of the writers for Science Fiction Encyclopedia. It's a collection of interviews with writers like Samuel Delany, Pat Cadigan, Ai Jiang. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's an incredible book. So that'll be out soon. And also, I just want to thank my fellow panelist, Ann Phoenix. I am in awe of all of your work. Keeping this field healthy and filled with wonderful stories. Thank you so much for all that you do.
You too.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.